There are places on this planet that feel completely removed from it. Tiny islands, lost in endless oceans. Human settlements surrounded by nothing but ice, desert, or silence. Towns separated from what we consider the normal way of life. These locations are so distant, they exist far beyond the chaos of the modern world. This is a journey to the edges of the map. Stay tuned as we bring you closer to 19 of the most remote places on Earth. At -71 degrees Celsius, ink freezes inside pens. Steel becomes brittle enough to shatter. Eyelashes ice over within seconds of stepping outside. And yet, every morning in Oymyakon, around 500 people get up, get dressed in layers of reindeer fur, and go about their day. Oymyakon sits in a valley in Russia's far east, roughly 900 kilometers from the nearest city of Yakutsk, itself already one of the coldest cities on Earth. To get there, you drive 2 days along a highway known as the Road of Bones, named for the prisoners who died building it under Stalin, and whose bodies were buried in the permafrost beneath the road surface. The valley's mountains trap cold air in a bowl, pushing temperatures lower than almost anywhere on the planet. The coldest official reading was -67.7 degrees in 1933. There is a monument in the town square marking the spot where an unofficial reading of -71.2 was recorded in 1924. The monument is outside, in the cold, because of course it is. Daily life here operates on rules that exist nowhere else. Cars are kept running around the clock because if an engine stops in deep winter, it will not start again. Glasses cannot be worn outdoors. The metal freezes to skin within seconds. Phones stop functioning below a certain temperature, which means most of January. The school stays open unless it drops below -52 degrees, at which point even Oymyakon decides it is too cold for children to attend. The ground is permanently frozen. Nothing grows. The diet is almost entirely meat, reindeer, horse, frozen fish, because vegetables cannot be imported in sufficient quantities to matter. What little fresh produce arrives comes at prices most residents cannot afford. There is one shop. There is no plumbing in many homes, which means outhouses in temperatures that make the thought almost incomprehensible. In winter, daylight lasts 3 hours. In summer, it reaches 21 hours, and the temperature occasionally climbs above 30 degrees Celsius, a swing of over 100 degrees across the year that no other permanently inhabited place experiences. Burying the dead is a challenge that requires days. The permafrost must be thawed with hot coals before a grave can be dug. Life in Oymyakon is not surviving despite the cold. It is surviving because of habits built over generations for exactly this. The supply ship comes twice a year, once in July, once in September. Everything the town needs for the next 6 months, food, medicine, building materials, fuel, arrives on those 2 visits. If something runs out in February, it stays out until summer. Ittoqqortoormiit sits on the east coast of Greenland, 500 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle and 831 kilometers from the nearest other settlement on the island. There is no road connecting it to anywhere. For 9 months of the year, sea ice makes boat access impossible. The only way in or out is a helicopter that shuttles passengers to a small airport 38 kilometers away, which itself has just 2 international flights per week, both to Iceland, not to the Greenlandic mainland. To reach the rest of Greenland from Ittoqqortoormiit, you first fly to Iceland, then connect onward. The town's 325 residents live in colorful wooden houses scattered across a rocky shoreline, where polar bears are sighted regularly enough that leaving town without a rifle is genuinely discouraged. The community survives on hunting: seal, muskox, polar bear, walrus, narwhal. The Inuit families here hunt the same way their ancestors did, reading the ice conditions, reading the seasons, reading the animals. The town has a church, a school, a small museum, and a pub that opens 1 night a week. There is one guest house, once described as the most remote hotel on Earth. It has Wi-Fi, electricity, and a stack of 1990s DVDs. Amazon delivers parcels by charter plane approximately once every 2 months. Children grow up here hunting and sledding, then most of them leave for school in western Greenland or Denmark. Few come back. The school population has dropped from 130 children a decade ago to under 60 today. The people who remain are often those for whom this landscape is simply home, not a hardship to endure, but the only version of home that makes sense. The danger is quieter than extreme cold or violent storms. It is the slow erosion of sea ice. The ice is the highway. It is how hunters travel. It is how supplies reach outlying areas. As it freezes later each year and breaks up earlier, the entire rhythm of life in Ittoqqortoormiit shifts with it. The town has survived a century in one of the most hostile corners of the planet. Climate change may be the first thing it cannot adapt to. Every weekday morning, a mule train loads up at the canyon rim and begins the 8-mile descent into the Grand Canyon. The cargo is groceries. The nearest supermarket is 120 miles away at the top, and there is no road down, so the mules carry it: frozen food, fresh produce, medicine, packages, letters, 5 days a week, every week of the year, in heat that regularly reaches 40 degrees Celsius at the canyon floor. This is the United States Postal Service. This is how it has worked for over a century. Supai is the only place in America where the mail is still delivered by mule. It sits 8 miles below the canyon rim, 300 meters lower in elevation, accessible only on foot, by horse, or by helicopter. The village has around 200 permanent residents, members of the Havasupai tribe, the Havasubaja, the people of the blue-green waters. They have lived here for over 1,000 years. The blue-green water is real. A hidden limestone aquifer above the village feeds a series of turquoise waterfalls that cascade through red canyon walls in colors that seem digitally enhanced until you stand in front of them. The Havasupai built their lives around these waters long before any outsider ever saw them, farming corn, beans, and squash on the fertile canyon floor, hunting in winter, living inside walls of stone that gave them shelter, water, and isolation in equal measure. What the canyon gave as protection, the American government later weaponized as confinement. By the 1880s, settlers, ranchers, and mining operations had been pushing the tribe off the plateau above for years. In 1880, the federal government formalized the displacement, establishing a reservation that restricted the Havasupai to the canyon floor, stripping them of plateau lands they had used seasonally for generations. They spent nearly a century legally fighting to get those lands back. In 1975, the government partially restored them. The tribe's reservation now covers 180,000 acres. Today, thousands of visitors hike down each week to see the waterfalls, entering via a permit lottery held once a year. They pass through Supai to reach the campground. The village has one small lodge, one store, one cafe. No cars, no paved streets, no streetlights. Flash floods are the constant threat. In 2018, a wall of water forced the helicopter evacuation of 200 visitors. In a place with one way in and no road out, a flood does not give warnings. It gives minutes. The mules keep coming regardless. There are no roads across most of it, no towns, no infrastructure, just 1,600 kilometers of high plateau stretching across northern Tibet, averaging 4,800 meters above sea level, where the oxygen in the air is roughly 60% of what it is at sea level, and winter temperatures fall to minus 40 degrees at night. The Chang is roughly the size of Spain and France combined. Around 500,000 people live there. They move constantly and have for centuries, following their animals across one of the most inhospitable surfaces on Earth. The Changpa, the people of the north, are nomadic pastoralists who have inhabited this plateau for at least 1,000 years. Their economy is yak, sheep, and goat. A family's wealth is measured in animals. In summer, they drive the herds to higher pastures and graze the grasslands before the cold returns. In winter, they move to lower elevations and survive on stored dairy products, slaughtered meat, and butter tea, a mixture of tea, yak butter, and salt that keeps the body warm in a way that nothing else does at this altitude. The tents they live in are woven from yak hair. The yak provides milk, meat, wool, transport, and fuel. On the Chang, the yak is not an animal, it is civilization. What makes the Changpa remarkable is not merely that they survive here, but that they have constructed a complete and functional life in conditions that would make most of the world's population acutely ill within hours. Altitude sickness, in its severe forms, can kill within days. The Changpa bloodlines carry genetic adaptations that allow their bodies to extract oxygen from thin air in ways that outside visitors cannot replicate regardless of acclimatization. They are, at a biological level, built for a place that was not built for humans. The Chinese government has spent decades attempting to settle the Changpa into permanent villages, viewing nomadism as primitive and inefficient. Many families have been relocated. The ones who remain nomadic are fewer each generation. The grasslands they depend on are being fenced. The herds are shrinking. The knowledge of how to read the plateau, which pasture will hold water in which season, which route avoids the worst winter storms, how many animals a given stretch of grass can sustain without destroying itself, is knowledge that takes a lifetime to acquire and cannot be written down. When the last nomadic families leave the Tang, that knowledge leaves with them. Rinconada is the highest permanent human settlement on Earth, sitting at 5,100 meters above sea level in the Peruvian Andes, beneath a glacier called Sleeping Beauty. At this altitude, every breath delivers roughly half the oxygen it would at sea level. The nearest city of any size is Juliaca, a 2.5-hour drive down a mountain road that closes for months in winter. Around 50,000 to 70,000 people live here. The city has no running water, no sewage system, and no waste collection. The ground is saturated with mercury, used to extract gold from ore and burned off in open shop fronts by miners breathing the vapor directly. That mercury drifts upward, condenses on the glacier above town, and melts back into the only water source available. The rain is acidic with mercury contamination. A local farmer 40 kilometers downstream reported that 83% of his community tested positive for heavy metals in their blood. The mine runs on a system called cachorreo. Miners work 30 consecutive days without pay. On the 31st day, they are allowed to carry out whatever ore they can lift on their shoulders. If it contains gold, they keep it. If it doesn't, the month was free. Miners report being sent deliberately to exhausted tunnels on their payment day. There is no contract, no legal recourse, no alternative. Women are banned from the mines by tradition, so they work the tailings piles outside, sifting discarded rock for fragments the miners missed in cold that drops to -12 at night. La Rinconada is called La Ciudad Sin Ley, the lawless city of Peru. In 2019, 7 miners were found shot in the head inside a single tunnel. Between 100 and 300 bars operate as illegal brothels. An estimated 4,500 women arrived from Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia under false pretenses and could not leave. There is one clinic in the entire city. Life expectancy is 30 to 35 years. The gold extracted here ends up in global supply chains, purchased by international refiners, and has been traced to products made by companies including Apple and Samsung. People come because poverty elsewhere leaves them no better option. Some find gold, most don't. Leaving requires money for the road, and the road takes the money first. Walk around this town on a summer day and the streets are empty. No one is outside. The thermometer reads 50 degrees Celsius. Birds have been found dead, mid-flight, fallen from the sky. The tallest tree in town was built from scrap metal because nothing grows here. But underground, it is 23 degrees and perfectly still. Coober Pedy sits in the South Australian outback, 850 kilometers north of Adelaide, about 9 hours by road through nothing. The name comes from the Aboriginal term Kupapiti, which means white man's hole. It was given that name because from the very beginning, the people who came here disappeared into the ground. In 1915, a 14-year-old boy named Willie Hutchison, accompanying his father on an unsuccessful gold prospecting trip, stumbled across opal on the surface of the dirt. Word spread fast. Miners came from across Australia and eventually from 45 different countries, post-war immigrants, returning soldiers who knew how to live in dugouts from the trenches, fortune seekers who had nothing to lose. They found the opals and they found the heat, and the heat won every time they tried to sleep above ground. The solution was obvious. Go where the miners already were, dig a room, move in. Today, around half of Coober Pedy's 3,500 residents live underground in homes bored into the sandstone hillsides called dugouts. The underground community has expanded over decades to include churches, a hotel, a bookshop, a hair salon, a pool room, and a bar. The Serbian Orthodox Church, carved entirely from rock in the 1990s, has vaulted sandstone ceilings and backlit stained glass that glow amber in the dark. There are no windows anywhere, no wind, no temperature change between morning and night, summer and winter. Residents describe the quiet as absolute. Coober Pedy produces approximately 70% of the world's opals. The landscape above ground looks like the surface of another planet. Crater fields of excavated spoil, rusting machinery, ventilation shafts poking up through the dirt. Hole markers warn walkers not to step in unmarked mine shafts. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was filmed here. It needed almost no set dressing. The danger is not dramatic. Water is scarce and expensive to pipe in. Medical services are minimal. The nearest hospital with serious capability is hours away. A dugout collapse, rare but not impossible, can happen with no warning. Most residents have simply decided these are acceptable terms for a life that cannot be replicated anywhere else on Earth. The photograph has gone viral multiple times. A lone white house sitting in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by ocean, no other structure in sight, no road, no dock, just open North Atlantic in every direction. The theories that follow every time it resurfaces are spectacular. A billionaire's zombie apocalypse bunker, a reclusive tech mogul's private island, a government secret facility. The reality is considerably more mundane and somehow more interesting. Elliðaey is one of the Westman Islands off Iceland's south coast, about 8 kilometers from the island of Heimaey, which is the only inhabited island in the archipelago. It is reachable by boat tour from Heimaey, and on a clear day it is visible from the coast. It is remote, but it is not unreachable. What makes it look so isolated is that it has exactly one structure on it, and that structure has a very specific purpose. 300 years ago, 5 families lived on Elliðaey. They fished, they hunted puffins, the small seabirds that nest by the millions across the Westman Islands. Life was difficult enough that by the 1930s, the last of those families had left and the island became uninhabited. Puffin hunting continued, but as a seasonal activity conducted by visiting groups rather than permanent residents. In 1953, the Elliðaey Hunting Association built a small lodge on the island to make those hunting trips more comfortable. That is the building in the photograph. It has no electricity, no running water, a wood stove for heat. It is used a handful of times each year when hunters make the crossing to harvest puffins during the nesting season, then locked up and left empty for the rest of the year. The key exists. People have it. Nobody is building an apocalypse shelter inside. The crossing from Heimaey takes roughly 20 minutes by boat in decent conditions. The North Atlantic between the islands can be brutal, and in winter or bad weather, the crossing becomes dangerous enough that the lodge sits untouched for months at a time. Getting stranded on Elliðaey is not the result of choosing isolation. It is the result of weather deciding otherwise. For those who have stayed overnight in the lodge, the description is consistent. Total silence except for wind and seabirds. No artificial light anywhere on the horizon. A darkness at night that is complete. Most people find it extraordinary. Most are also glad the boat comes back in the morning. There are more polar bears on this island than people. Around 3,000 bears roam the archipelago. The human population is 2,400. Leaving the town limits without a rifle is not a suggestion. It is the law. Longyearbyen sits at 78 degrees north, halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole, 1,316 kilometers from the pole itself. It exists because of coal. An American businessman named John Longyear arrived in 1906, found coal in the mountains, and built a settlement around extracting it. Workers came, endured the dark and the cold, got paid well, and left. The coal is mostly gone now. The people stayed and kept coming. Today, Longyearbyen has 2,400 residents from 53 countries. Any nationality in the world can move here without a visa, as long as they can support themselves financially. No VAT, lower income tax than mainland Norway. The result is a town that feels like nowhere else on Earth. Thai restaurants, a university, a music festival, a surprisingly serious wine cellar, all surrounded by glaciers and polar bears. 4 months of the year the sun does not rise. For 4 months it does not set. Nobody can be buried here either. The permafrost preserves bodies intact instead of decomposing them, creating disease risk. So the cemetery stopped accepting new residents nearly a century ago. You cannot be born in Longyearbyen. You cannot die there and stay. It is a place you can only pass through, and cut into the mountain just outside town is one of the most important buildings on Earth that almost nobody will ever enter. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened in 2008, bored 130 meters into the solid rock of a mountain on the edge of town. Inside, in 3 rooms carved from permafrost, sit over 1.3 million seed varieties from almost every country in the world. Duplicates of crops held in gene banks across the globe, deposited here as a backup against whatever comes next: nuclear war, pandemic, climate collapse, a power outage, and a poorly funded gene bank in West Africa. The vault covers all of it. The seeds are sealed in foil packages, stored at -18 degrees Celsius, and require no permanent staff to maintain. The mountain itself keeps them cold if the power fails. Properly stored, some varieties will remain viable for over 1,000 years. It has already been used once in earnest. In 2015, the Syrian civil war destroyed the gene bank in Aleppo. Seeds were withdrawn from Svalbard, sent to Morocco and Lebanon, and replanted. The vault worked exactly as designed. There is an irony embedded in all of this. The coal that built Longyearbyen, that gave it its reason to exist, is precisely the kind of fuel driving the climate change now threatening the permafrost the vault depends on. The sea ice that once covered the fjord in winter is gone. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on Earth. The mountain holding humanity's agricultural insurance is in one of the places most visibly losing the battle against the crisis the vault was built to outlast. People come to Longyearbyen planning to stay a year. Most stay 7. There is a phrase locals use, the Arctic bug. For the moment, the place gets into you, and leaving starts to feel like the wrong direction. The wilderness is immediate. The darkness bonds people in ways difficult to explain to anyone who has not spent 4 months watching the sky stay black at noon. And just outside town, inside a frozen mountain, the world has quietly stored its Plan B. In 1896, a Swiss industrialist named Adolf Geyer-Zeller sketched a plan to build a railway through the Eiger Mountain up to the highest saddle in the Bernese Alps, and then higher still. Everyone agreed it was extraordinary. Most thought it was impossible. It took 16 years. Construction crews, mostly young Italian laborers, drilled and blasted through granite inside the mountain's core, working at altitude in conditions that had no precedent. Several died in explosions, falls, and tunnel accidents. Their names are on a plaque inside the mountain today, almost all of them Italian, almost all of them young. Geyer-Zeller himself died of pneumonia in 1899, 3 years in, having seen just the first section completed. His family finished it. The Jungfraujoch station opened in 1912 at 3,454 meters above sea level, the highest railway station in Europe, a record it still holds today. The journey to reach it from the valley town of Interlaken takes roughly 2 hours. The last stretch entirely underground through the Eiger and Munch, a tunnel bored through the living rock of 2 of Switzerland's most famous mountains. At intermediate stations cut into the cliff face, windows look out over sheer drops and glacier fields. The train emerges at the top into blinding white. 25 years after the station opened, a research observatory was built on a rocky pinnacle 117 meters above it. The Sphinx Observatory sits at 3,571 meters, the highest permanent building in Europe. Getting to it from the train station requires an elevator cut vertically into the rock. Researchers have worked here continuously since 1931, studying glaciology, cosmic rays, atmospheric chemistry, and climate. A team of 2 custodian couples lives on site in rotating shifts, maintaining the infrastructure, sending daily weather reports to Meteo Suisse, and keeping the place functioning through months of winter when temperatures outside drop below -20 and wind turns the exposed platform into something close to uninhabitable. The altitude is the entire reason for being here. Above most of Europe's weather systems, with clear sightlines in every direction and air that has not passed over industrial zones, the Sphinx sees things that lower stations cannot. From its viewing platform on a clear day, you can see into France, into Germany, across the full length of the Elliðaey Glacier, 23 kilometers of ice, nearly a kilometer thick, stretching south into the Alps. Most visitors spend 20 minutes on the platform before retreating inside. The researchers stay for weeks. At this altitude, without acclimatization, a brisk walk leaves you short of breath. The cold is not the problem. The thinness of the air is. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from anywhere, sits an island that shouldn't exist the way it does. No nearby continents, no easy access, and yet it is covered in hundreds of massive stone faces, silently staring out to sea. This is Easter Island, one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. The nearest populated land is over 2,000 kilometers away. Flights arrive only a handful of times a week from mainland Chile. And beyond that, there is nothing but open ocean in every direction. But isolation isn't what makes this place extraordinary. It's what humans built here. Scattered across the island are nearly 1,000 moai statues, some standing over 10 meters tall and weighing more than 80 tons. They were carved centuries ago by the island's early Polynesian settlers, using tools far more primitive than what we'd expect for something of this scale. How they were moved remains partially contested. Oral tradition says the moai walked. Experimental archaeology has shown they could be rocked upright on their base and shuffled forward with ropes, requiring around 40 people per statue. The island was densely forested when the first Polynesian settlers arrived, estimated between the 9th and 13th centuries. By the time Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen arrived in 1722, it was almost entirely deforested. Trees felled for agriculture, for fuel, and most likely to move the statues. Without forest cover, the soil eroded. Without soil, the crops failed. The civilization that built nearly 1,000 massive stone figures across a 24-kilometer island had consumed the resources that made it possible. Life on Easter Island has never been easy. The island is small, with limited natural resources. Over time, deforestation and overuse pushed the ecosystem to its limits. Some researchers believe this led to societal collapse, turning what was once a thriving culture into a struggle for survival. Today, around 7,000 people live here. There's a small town, an airport, even internet, but isolation still defines daily life. Supplies are expensive, emergencies are complicated, and leaving the island isn't always simple. And yet people stay, because despite everything, there's something almost magnetic about this place. The silence, the scale, the feeling that you're standing at the edge of the world, surrounded by the echoes of a civilization that refused to disappear quietly. Easter Island isn't just remote. It's a reminder that even in the most isolated corners of the planet, humans will always try to leave something behind. If you wanted to disappear from the world in the 1800s, this is where you were sent. In 1815, after his final defeat, Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled to St. Helena, a tiny volcanic island in the middle of the South Atlantic. Not because it was beautiful, but because escape was impossible. The nearest continent is over 1,800 kilometers away. For most of its history, the only way in or out was by ship, a journey that could take days, sometimes weeks, depending on the weather. And for the people who live here today, that isolation is still very real. The island's main settlement, Jamestown, is wedged between steep cliffs with a single road zigzagging up what locals simply call the ladder. There are no highways, no sprawling suburbs, just a tight-knit community of around 4,000 people, where everyone seems to know everyone else. Until recently, if you missed the supply ship, you waited. Food, fuel, medicine. Everything depended on what arrived by sea. Even today, flights are limited and often disrupted by harsh winds, making travel unpredictable. But life here has its own rhythm. There's little traffic, crime is almost non-existent, and time moves slower, intentionally so. People fish, farm, and work in small local businesses. News spreads by conversation more than headlines. Yet, isolation comes with trade-offs. Medical emergencies can still mean urgent evacuation flights. Job opportunities are limited, which pushes many young people to leave, and the cost of imported goods remains high. But for those who stay, St. Helena offers something increasingly rare: distance, from noise, from pressure, from the constant urgency of the modern world. It's the kind of place where history doesn't feel distant, because it never really left. And maybe that's why Napoleon spent his final years here, not just because he couldn't escape, but because on an island like this, the rest of the world feels impossibly far away. If something goes wrong here, help isn't coming anytime soon. In fact, the nearest hospital is over 2,400 kilometers away. Welcome to Tristan da Cunha, officially the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. There's no airport, no quick way out, just a small fishing village called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, and the endless Atlantic Ocean surrounding it. Fewer than 300 people live here, and almost all of them share just a handful of last names, because the entire population descends from a few original settlers. And life here depends on one thing: the sea. Fishing, especially lobster, is the backbone of the local economy. When the waters are rough, work stops. When supply ships can't dock, essentials run low. Sometimes weeks pass with no contact beyond radio signals. But isolation isn't just about distance, it's about vulnerability. In 1961, the island's volcano erupted. With no way to contain it, the entire population had to be evacuated to the UK. For 2 years, Tristan da Cunha stood empty, a reminder of how fragile life is in a place like this. And yet, almost everyone came back. Today, the island has basic services: a school, a small hospital, even internet, but everything is limited. If you need specialized medical care, you're looking at a week-long boat journey to South Africa, assuming the weather cooperates. Still, people stay, because here, community isn't optional, it's survival. Everyone helps everyone. Doors are rarely locked. And in a world that's constantly moving faster, Tristan da Cunha remains almost unchanged. There are no crowds, almost no noise, and no easy escape. It's just a community of a handful of people choosing to live at the edge of the world. Pitcairn Island is a volcanic rock 3.6 kilometers wide in the middle of the South Pacific, 2,075 kilometers from Easter Island and 5,000 kilometers from New Zealand. It has no airport, no harbor, and no natural landing site. The only way ashore is by longboat through the surf at Bounty Bay. The current population is 35 people. It is the least populated jurisdiction on Earth. Those 35 people are almost all descended from the same 9 men. In 1789, the crew of HMS Bounty mutinied against Captain William Bligh in the South Pacific, set him adrift in an open boat with 18 loyal sailors, and sailed back to Tahiti. Fletcher Christian, who led the mutiny, knew the Royal Navy would come looking. He took 9 of the mutineers, 6 Tahitian men and 12 Tahitian women, and went searching for somewhere remote enough to disappear. He found Pitcairn. The island's position had been incorrectly charted by a British captain in 1767, placing it roughly 330 kilometers from its actual location. That navigational error may be the reason the mutineers were never found. They burned the Bounty in the bay to remove any trace, and the island vanished from the world's knowledge for 18 years. The first decade on Pitcairn was murderous. Disputes over land and women among the mutineers and Tahitian men collapsed into violence. By 1800, every Tahitian man was dead. All but one of the mutineers were dead, and only John Adams remained. 1 man, 9 women, and 19 children. Adams turned to the Bible, raised the children under strict religious order, and by the time an American sealing ship accidentally rediscovered the island in 1808, Pitcairn had become a functioning community of devout Christians. The Royal Navy, when it eventually arrived, granted Adams amnesty. He had already outlived the crime. The islanders today still speak Pitcairn, a Creole language blending 18th century English sailor dialect with Tahitian, incomprehensible to anyone arriving from outside. Most carry surnames from the original mutineers: Christian, Young, Brown, Warren. The island's only church is Seventh-day Adventist. Alcohol is banned. A supply ship arrives every few months carrying everything the island cannot grow or make itself. The island's darkest recent chapter came in 1999, when a British police investigation uncovered decades of systematic child sexual abuse involving a significant portion of the adult male population. In 2004, 6 men were convicted of over 50 offenses. Several served their sentences on the island itself, in a jail built specifically for the trial, watched over by their own neighbors. The island was too small and too remote to send them anywhere else. The population has been declining for decades. Britain has offered free land to attract new settlers. Almost no one comes. The people who remain were born here, or married in, or arrived and found they could not leave in the way they expected. The next supply ship is months away. Antarctica has 3 bars. All of them are at McMurdo. McMurdo Station sits on the southern tip of Ross Island, roughly 3,800 kilometers from Christchurch, New Zealand, the nearest city of any consequence. It is the largest human settlement on the continent, capable of housing up to 1,200 people in summer, dropping to around 150 through the Antarctic winter. Over 100 buildings spread across 2.5 square kilometers of volcanic rock. Dormitories, laboratories, a fire station, a post office, a chapel, a greenhouse, a gym, a climbing wall, a library, 3 radio stations with a vinyl collection, and those 3 bars. By the standards of Antarctica, McMurdo is a city. It was established in 1956 as a U.S. Navy base and functions today as the logistical hub for all American operations on the continent. Almost everything heading deeper into Antarctica, cargo, scientists, fuel, food, passes through McMurdo first. It has its own airport, actually 3 runways, one built on sea ice each year and dismantled before the thaw. The flight from Christchurch takes around 5 hours in a military transport aircraft and lands on a white expanse with no markings visible from the air until the final descent. Most people arriving in Antarctica for the first time land here. Life at McMurdo operates on a rhythm that bears little resemblance to ordinary employment. Work weeks run 54 hours, 6 days. Everyone takes turns cleaning bathrooms. The 2 hours a day of internet access, satellite-dependent, slow, and unreliable, are rationed. During vessel season, when supply ships arrive in January and February, the bars close and alcohol sales stop entirely, because the arrival of hundreds of sailors who have spent weeks at sea has historically caused enough disruption that a blanket ban became policy. The people who come to McMurdo are a specific kind of person. Scientists, yes, but also plumbers, cooks, electricians, and welders who signed up to spend months at the bottom of the world maintaining infrastructure in temperatures that drop to -50. Werner Herzog made a documentary here in 2007 called Encounters at the End of the World. He spent most of it marveling at the residents' reasons for being here. Almost none of them straightforward, almost none reducible to career advancement or salary. McMurdo is extreme by any normal standard, but it has bars, internet, a bowling alley that ran for decades before the building was demolished, and a flight home if you need one. The next station on the ice does not. 600 kilometers east of McMurdo's relative civilization, on a floating platform of ice 150 meters thick drifting slowly toward the open ocean, sits something altogether different. Halley 6 Research Station has been operated by the British Antarctic Survey on the Brunt Ice Shelf since 1956. The current version, the 6th iteration, each previous one having been buried, crushed, or threatened by the moving ice, is the world's first fully relocatable polar research station. 8 modules on hydraulic legs mounted on skis. The legs raise as snow accumulates, a meter every year. When the ice beneath threatens to crack away entirely, The whole station can be towed to a safer position by tractor. In 2017, after a crack in the shelf threatened to calve off the section the station sat on and send it drifting into the Weddell Sea, the station was moved 23 kilometers in a single operation. That crack is still growing. Access is possible only during a 3-month summer window. When that window closes, the 16 researchers who remain for winter are cut off until the following season. The sun disappears for 105 consecutive days. Temperatures drop to -56, winds exceed 160 kilometers per hour. A medical emergency during winter means one doctor treating their own patients with no evacuation possible. Not because of policy, but because no aircraft can safely land in those conditions. The station is simply unreachable. The interior was designed with this in mind. A color psychologist was hired to create a palette calibrated specifically to sustain people through months of darkness. The alarm clocks simulate dawn to regulate melatonin. The wood throughout the social module is Lebanese cedar, chosen because it is the only wood that releases a natural scent, and in a place where every sensory connection to the outside world has been severed. The smell of wood matters. The station exists here because in 1985, scientists working at this precise location first detected the hole in the ozone layer. The data that changed global environmental policy came from this shelf, on this drifting ice, at this latitude. That is why Britain maintains a presence here in winter. And that is why, when a crack in the ice forced the question of whether to abandon it, the answer was to build legs and skis and move. The British are roughly 14,000 kilometers from home. They are also roughly 1,500 kilometers from the place we go to next. At the geographic South Pole, the ice sheet is 2,835 meters thick. The station sits on top of it, not on rock. The ice moves roughly 10 meters per year, which means the ceremonial South Pole marker, a mirrored sphere on a striped pole, surrounded by the flags of the original Antarctic Treaty Nations, is repositioned every January 1st to account for the drift. The pole itself is always at 90 degrees south. The station moves. Around 150 people work here in summer. In winter, that number drops to approximately 40. From mid-February to late October, no aircraft can reach them. The jet fuel that powers the only planes capable of making the trip freezes into an unusable gel at -60. The South Pole in winter sits at an average of -49, dropping as low as -82. For more than 8 months, those 40 people are more isolated from other humans than astronauts aboard the International Space Station, which orbits only 400 kilometers above Earth. The nearest other humans, at a Russian coastal station, are 1,300 kilometers away. The winter begins with a tradition. After the last flight of the season lifts off and disappears north, the winter crew sits down and watches all 3 versions of The Thing: the 1951 original, the 1982 Carpenter film, and the 2011 remake, back to back. A story about a small, isolated group in Antarctica being picked off one by one. Everyone finds this funny. Nobody has explained why, but they do it every year. 6 months of darkness follow. The psychological pressure has a name: winter over syndrome, characterized by depression, irritability, memory difficulties, and a condition called long eye, a mild dissociative state in which people stare blankly for extended periods without registering it. Research published after decades of study found that the most significant stressor is not the cold, not the danger, not the physical hardship. It is the monotony and the problem of living in forced proximity to the same small group of people with no relief, no privacy, and no exit until spring. In 1999, a doctor stationed here discovered she had breast cancer. She performed her own biopsy, administered her own chemotherapy, and waited 6 months until a rescue flight could reach her. It was only the 3rd emergency winter evacuation in the station's history. What keeps people coming back, and many do come back year after year, is harder to articulate. The darkness, when it is clear, reveals the Milky Way horizon to horizon with no light pollution. The southern lights appear regularly in the auroral zone. Sunsets at the South Pole last for weeks, the sun spiraling down toward the horizon over the course of a month before finally disappearing. Those who have seen it consistently describe it as one of the most extraordinary things a human being can witness. Then the darkness comes, and the 40 people settle in and they wait. Every place on this list has people. Researchers, miners, nomads, descendants of mutineers, astronauts. Even the most hostile locations on Earth have someone who calls them home, or at least someone passing through. Point Nemo has nobody. It cannot. There is nothing to stand on. Point Nemo is not a place in the conventional sense. It is a coordinate. The single point in the world's oceans that is furthest from any land in any direction. The nearest coastline is 2,688 kilometers away, and the 3 closest landmasses are all uninhabited islands. To reach actual civilization from here, you would travel further than London to New York. No shipping lane passes through it. No flight path crosses it. The ocean here is so far from any coastal runoff, so locked inside a rotating gyre that pushes nutrients away, that it is one of the least biologically active stretches of water on the planet. It is, in the most literal sense, the middle of nowhere. It was first calculated in 1992 by a Croatian-Canadian engineer named Hrvoje Lukatela, who wrote a geospatial program to solve what he called the longest swim problem. If you fell overboard anywhere in the ocean, where would you have to be for the nearest shore to be as far away as possible? The answer was here, and he named it after Jules Verne's Captain Nemo. Nemo means nobody in Latin. When the International Space Station passes overhead, the astronauts aboard are closer to this point than any human being on Earth. The station orbits at 400 kilometers. The nearest inhabited land is more than 6 times further away. The International Space Station itself is scheduled to be guided out of orbit and broken apart over this empty patch of ocean where no ship travels and nothing lives. The ISS is not remote in the way any other place on this list is remote. It is 400 kilometers above the Earth, traveling at 28,000 kilometers per hour, completing a full orbit every 90 minutes. In a single day, the crew sees 16 sunrises. The planet below fills the windows continuously. In one sense, they are never far from home. In another sense, they are completely unreachable. 6 or 7 people live aboard the station at any given time, representing 5 space agencies across 15 nations. They sleep in bags fixed to walls in individual cabins roughly the size of a phone booth. Clothes are worn for 3 days and then discarded. There is no washing machine. Water is extracted from humidity, urine, and condensation by a recycling system that converts everything the crew produces back into drinking water. The food arrives dehydrated or in sealed pouches. Without gravity to settle food into the stomach, eating feels different. Without a shower, washing means wet cloths. Without a floor to stand on, the body naturally adopts a slight fetal curl. Shaving requires a suction device to prevent stubble from floating into equipment. The body responds to all of this badly. Bones lose density at roughly 1% per month without gravity loading. Muscles atrophy without resistance. The spine decompresses, making astronauts temporarily taller. Fluid shifts toward the head, giving many astronauts permanently puffy faces and a sensation of chronic nasal congestion. Vision deteriorates in a significant percentage of long-duration crew members as intracranial pressure changes. The station's radiation environment is a constant background concern, equivalent over a 6-month mission to roughly the dose received from several thousand chest X-rays. None of this is why astronauts find it difficult. What they describe finding difficult is the sameness, the same corridors, the same 7 faces, the same view, however extraordinary. Canadian astronaut David St. Jacques, speaking from orbit, put it plainly, the problem is that everything is a little bit the same every day, and if you are not careful, it can be depressing. Russian psychologists who spent decades monitoring cosmonauts aboard Mir identified a consistent 3-phase pattern. adaptation, then fatigue and low motivation, then hypersensitivity and irritability they called asthenia. Nobody has found a cure other than going home. And yet, the waiting list to go is years long. Because when the ISS passes over a city at dusk, bright enough to see with the naked eye, moving faster than anything else in the sky, the people looking up and the people looking down are seeing the same thing from opposite directions. And the ones looking down say it changes everything. On January 23, 1960, two men climbed inside a steel sphere the size of a small room, sealed the hatch, and began to sink. It took 5 hours to reach the bottom. At one point, a loud crack echoed through the hull. The plexiglass viewport had fractured under the pressure. They kept going. When the bathyscaphe Trieste finally settled into the silt of the Challenger Deep, Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh were 10,916 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. No human being had ever been further from the sky. Then they waited 20 minutes, looked at what they could see through the cracked window, and came back up. Nobody returned for 52 years. The Mariana Trench is a crescent-shaped scar in the western Pacific floor. 2,550 kilometers long and, on average, 69 kilometers wide, formed where the Pacific tectonic plate grinds beneath the smaller Mariana Plate at roughly 2 centimeters per year. At its deepest point, the Challenger Deep, some 300 kilometers southwest of Guam, the ocean floor is 10,935 meters below sea level. If you placed Mount Everest on that floor, its summit would still be more than a kilometer underwater. The water pressure at the bottom is 1,086 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level, roughly equivalent to having 50 jumbo jets stacked on top of a single square meter of surface. Temperature hovers between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. There is no light. There has never been light. In 2012, filmmaker James Cameron made the descent alone, becoming the first person to solo dive the Challenger Deep. Between 2019 and 2022, a series of expeditions by explorer Victor Vescovo brought the total number of people to have ever reached the bottom to fewer than 30. Fewer people have been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench than have walked on the moon. Life exists here regardless. Sea cucumbers move through the silt. Single-celled organisms have been found at 10.6 kilometers depth. Translucent amphipods, shrimp-like creatures adapted to crushing pressure, were filmed in abundance. Microplastic particles have been found in their bodies. The most remote, most inaccessible, most lightless place on the planet is not beyond the reach of what humans have put into the water. When Piccard and Walsh sat at the bottom in 1960, they reported seeing a flatfish drift past the viewport. Scientists have debated ever since whether vertebrate fish can actually survive at that depth, whether the calcium in their bones would dissolve. No definitive answer has been reached. The trench keeps its secrets. We have barely looked. What do you think of the most remote places on Earth? Would you like to take a journey there? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, check out another deep dive into the world's most fascinating places in our video about the 9 engineering wonders of the modern world. Keep following Signum, and we will see you in the next video.